good afternoon to this august gathering present here. We're pleasant to have so many people braving the winter Sunday afternoon. Calcutta has always been known to be a very lackadaisical city, but I'm just glad that we are proving all of these men and women outside Calcutta wrong. Therefore, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for turning up. It is because of you that we get to believe that great cities are probably built not just with roads, buildings, and bridges, but on the collective intellect of the populace. It is again because of you, ladies and gentlemen, that we get to share this thought that robust and liberal societies need such dynamic platforms such as Apeejay Calcutta Literary Festival to carry out such great conversations and nuanced thinking. With that, ladies and gentlemen, if we have settled down, I'd like to formally introduce all our panelists here. Yes. Well, we have with us the very talented Miss Mallika Basu, who happens to be a food writer and author of 2 cookbooks, if I'm not wrong. One is Miss Masala, and the other is Masala. Next, of course, we have Julia Roberts, who happens to be the director of Ginger and Spice Festival, United Kingdom. What an exciting thing, isn't it? Next, we have Manjri Agarwal, who, in my opinion, is quite a number of things. She's a writer, she's a critic, she is also a teaching chef, right? She has co-authored the Healthy Cooking for Patients with Kidney Ailments. Okay, that's pretty interesting, which was published by Rupa Publications India in the year 2012. And of course, we have Shaun Kenworthy here, who is going to preside over the session as our moderator, who began his career as a chef in Yorkshire and London. He has spent the best part of the last 10 years consulting to the hospitality industry and helping new project startups across the globe, over 50 projects. He also writes regularly for T2, the lifestyle supplement of the Telegraph, which I'm sure all of us read every day, don't we all? With our ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause for this stellar panel. A huge round of applause, can we? Thank you.
So thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming at such short notice, I think. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to come, actually. I did say to Mina, if I don't turn up on the day, Mina's there. She was... but such a lovely space as well. I suppose we should thank the... so apparently this has been opened by Sienna Cafe, if I think I'm correct. I think so. It's not been launched as yet, but such a beautiful space. I think we're all excited about the space, probably more than we are about the conversation today. So I'm going to start off just to let these lovely ladies that I'm feeling a little bit intimidated by sat here today, just to introduce themselves a little bit, obviously. Time's always against us with these kind of situations. So I think if they can spend a few minutes just introducing themselves to you, and obviously to me to a certain extent as well. And I guess we can start with Manjri, who's a good friend, known her for a long time, been involved in restaurants, has owned restaurants, and has been doing lots of good work over the years in many different areas. So I think, yeah, I think so.
Thank you, Shaun. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, AKLF, for having us here. It's absolutely lovely, and I love the venue. So waiting for it to launch. Congratulations. A little about myself. I'm actually a Bombay girl, born, brought up, got married into Calcutta, and my passion for food actually started after I got married. I wasn't a cook or a writer before that, and I think necessity is the mother of all inventions, and we were living abroad, and we had to figure it out, and that's how I really developed my passion for food. And there's been no turning back since. I have written 2 cookbooks. I have taught. We used to live in Singapore, so I used to teach Indian food and Middle Eastern food there. I have even done a whole lot of workshops and had 3 restaurants, 2 of them franchises, just to get my hands wet and learn the business. And then I was ready to launch my own brand in Bombay called Hitchkey. And now I'm in the health and wellness space. So I'm a health coach. I write for write on health and healthy cooking for children specifically, a lot of healthy recipes. And I'm also, when I'm not writing or not cooking, I'm a trekker, so I love climbing mountains, I run marathons, and I'm in the fitness space. I think they both marry very well, both the passions.
Brilliant. So I think we'll discuss that whole fitness element and food a little bit later. So Mallika, I think we've known each other from a distance for quite a while. First time we're meeting, we've had conversations on the phone in the past. 2 books I think you've written so far.
That's right, yes.
So I think you can explain a little bit about that.
Grand. I'm going to ask if you can hear me first. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Well, thank you very much for having me. This is a fantastic pleasure because I'm a born and brought up through and through Calcutta girl. Okay, I refuse to call it Kolkata. And I'm here with my second book, which is called Masala, having launched my first book, Miss Masala, at Oxford Bookstore in Park Street. So, thank you very much. Now, my story is not entirely dissimilar to Manjri's, except that I grew up as a very fussy eater. So my mum could have probably done with some of your help, if I'm honest, as when I was a child growing up. But I discovered a real love for cooking because I got very, very hungry. And I realized, because I was married to I am married to a half British, half Peruvian man. If I didn't learn how to cook, basically I would have to go without ghar ka khana. And so that's how I started teaching myself. And very quickly I wrote a food blog. The food blog led to my first book. And then I sort of kept going in my corporate PR career. So I still work in corporate PR. I've had 19 years. I have a senior consultancy role. I have 2 kids who are aged 9.5 and 8. And somewhere along the line, I decided that I would basically do the cookery writing a bit more professionally. And 3.5 years ago, I started writing for the London Evening Standard. I write Britain's first ever Indian food column. And it led to my second book, which has now been published with by Bloomsbury Publishing. And I'm here very excited to talk about all things Indian cooking related. And thank you very much for having me.
So congratulations on the Evening Standard. I mean, that's quite so dedicated. So I spent 10 years in London, and obviously I think everybody was dedicated to the Evening Standard every day, particularly Faye Maxter's food columns. Is she still writing?
She does.
She must be about 90 by now or something.
I wouldn't like to comment on a lady's age, but yes, she's old.
I actually bumped into her daughter about 15 years ago here, actually.
Right,
interestingly.
right.
She was traveling around India. But anyway, so then on to Julia, somebody who I have not met before. I read Julia Roberts, and I'm sure you get this all the time, but I did wash my hair today, especially, just in case. I wasn't sure.
I'm practicing for a new role as a British girl.
So you have this festival, which I think you can tell a little bit about yourself and this festival that you've started in the UK.
Yes, hi everyone, thanks so much for coming. Yes, like you, I also work in communications as my day job. I've done that for 20 years and it's lovely, it's really a wonderful job to do. And it gives you great skills to go on and do other things, like running a festival. I run a UK-based festival in a town, a really small rural town in Shropshire called Market Drayton, which I'm sure not many of you have heard about, unless you were with me yesterday and heard me talking about it. It's actually called the home of gingerbread, and we have the oldest brand of gingerbread in the country, and here it is. It's called Billington's Gingerbread, which I'll talk about more later. The festival is now in its 3rd year. It's called Ginger and Spice because we have a really interesting historic link to India through the town and our colonial past. So we celebrate that and open it up for a dialogue and discussion. But also, we're very, very keen on bringing the community together to celebrate all the local producers in the town. Now, we have a huge problem in the UK, and it's probably similar here with multinationals pushing out local food producers. And there is a really big artisan movement, but they really struggle to have a place on the high street. And we have empty shops and betting shops, and the high street in our town just doesn't look great. So the Ginger and Spice Festival was a way of sort of challenging that and to bring the community together and promote the town to attract more people to come. And it's now in its 3rd year, and it's a real success. It's doing very well.
So that's so I think in the UK we have please. In the UK we have lots of festivals happening, I think, don't we, around food, particularly of recent years. And all of a sudden there's like a whole kind of like truck, kind of like trend, like there's trucks all over the UK. Food trucks doing great food. But I want to kind of like chip into this. Obviously, it's something that interests me, and to a certain extent, as an Englishman myself, I feel a bit embarrassed sometimes talking about colonialism and the colonial past. But the British are obsessed by India, really. And obviously, I think there's a huge connect that most English people have with India, particularly curries, if you like, which are, I think curry is probably the most spoken food word in the world, I would imagine. Almost every country has a curry of some form. And this whole idea of ginger. So I grew up like smelling ginger in my grandmother's and aunt's houses, as did probably they. And this whole kind of like sweet spice culture that we have in the UK, obviously, comes from somewhere here. So a question I want to ask, and I think this can be for everybody, really. With the British being so obsessed by Indian food, if you like. And I think, obviously, it's a very different connection that an Indian would have with Indian food than, let's say, somebody from a foreign country would have as far as that's concerned. And I really think it's more to do with the spice element of Indian food and that great combination of great flavorful, hard-hitting, hard-punching flavors, rather than traditional Indian food, which, to a certain extent, Indians would be much more interested in finding if they were abroad. So where do you see... So what do you think about that? And I guess this is open to you two, realistically. Is it about the Indian food, or is it about the spice in the UK? Or just generally in foreign countries? I have no idea. What do you think?
Well, I think it's interesting because if you look back at the heritage of the curry and the first recipes from the curry, which was an author called Hannah Glass and her book, they were much more fruit-based. So they were quite inspired by fruit and much milder spices. And they seem to have formed now into something which is, spice-busting and too hot. And you get the typical British guy who wants to go out and have loads of beers and curry and eat the hottest curry. That doesn't particularly interest me. I'm more interested in flavour and depth of flavour and how you can adapt that with food. But I do think there's been a journey with the spices in the country. Absolutely.
Obviously, much better Indian food generally in the UK than the Indian food that I grew up with. And I grew up in a small town of about 12,000 people, and we had 3 Indian restaurants in that town. I think most people from my generation, the first restaurant we ever went to was an Indian restaurant, realistically. What are your thoughts?
I think it's really, really important to make something very clear, is that curry is not Indian food.
For sure.
So there is a big difference between a British curry and what is our Indian cuisine. And I spent a lot of time in Britain, and frankly, anyone who will hear me, trying to make that distinction. And I recently, in summer actually, last year, I went into Marks and Spencer's, and they had a Bengali turmeric prawn curry masala. And I basically wrote about it. I just did a tweet saying, I grew up in Calcutta, born and brought up there. Can someone please explain to me what a turmeric curry is, Bengali turmeric curry is? And all the newspapers exploded. I went on BBC Radio, BBC Telly, I was on BBC World Service, zoned out everybody. And I think that the UK definitely has evolved a lot, especially London, and has a very sophisticated Indian food offering. But frankly, with the rest of the nation, there is a lot of education still needed. And until they know what they're talking about, I'm not going to stop.
So obviously you spent quite a lot of time overseas. And what was an overseas Indian restaurant to you back in those days, and what it's become today?
So I think overseas what Indian food is, it's of course extremely different. But what I like about the food over there, it's not that oily fried food that we serve in India sometimes. The association with it's got more flavor. They make sure that the spices are not mixed with each other, that we can't taste, you can't differentiate one from the other, all the vegetables look the same. So I think there's definitely a lot of evolution of Indian food, and the chefs who have moved overseas, or even the chefs over there, have really reinvented Indian food over there, which is now becoming quite the staple in India. The whole new age Indian food, modern cooking, which is what now the palate, everyone is really asking for. You know, Indian food, which is simpler, people can make it at home, it doesn't have like 20 ingredients, simpler to make. So I think that's what Indian food is now evolving as. Even when we come back home and we want to have Indian food, we still want to have that simple vegetable dal. We don't want all that complicated stuff which is like doused in oil anymore.
Yeah,
So
I
I think
think so.
tastes have really evolved overseas and in India. And it's lovely to see that, you know, certain sensibilities and the roots of flavors have not changed.
Yes,
That is what is beautiful about our cuisine.
yeah, I think so. And I also think that, I mean, Indian food internationally really hasn't started yet. It's hardly even taken off, realistically. Just a few countries in the world have taken to Indian food, but a lot of countries are completely naive to any spices or any idea of heavily, of heavy, let's say, base gravies and really tasty, heavily spiced food. On the back of that, we were talking earlier about healthy eating. Obviously, the world's becoming healthier. I think we also were chatting that, to a certain extent, I think people are becoming, or at least talking about being healthier, maybe not doing it yet. I think that's not quite starting to happen in the mainstream. And historically, I think Indian food used to take a lot of flack because obviously a lot of it was oil and grease based. But realistically, if you go back to traditions, ghee was the only, let's say, fat used in Indian food. And as of today, it's kind of like supposedly the most healthy fat in the world, realistically. So I think that heavy Indian food of the past, is that really the future of Indian food? I'm not 100% sure, actually. What do you think?
Can I take a stab at that? So I always feel that my grandmother's generation were the healthiest generation. There's something went wrong in the middle. The generation between, I think they were trying to experiment and something went wrong. But if we emulate what that generation ate and how they cooked their food and even their lifestyle, they were so active at home. I think we're just becoming, technology is just making us more and more lazy. So though you're not burning all that food that you're eating. And there was a reason why things were eaten. There was papad, which was, now we make it with soda, but traditionally in Rajasthan, they made it with saji, which is a digestive, and that's why you have it at the end of the meal, because it actually helps you digest your food. There was a reason why everything was made in ghee. There was a reason why certain vegetables were eaten in summer, certain vegetables were eaten in winter. They never had cross-seasonal vegetables. So I really feel if we emulate that generation, we will live very, very good and healthy lives. But that's difficult. Now with so much technology, with cold storages, I don't think that's possible, but as much as we can, I guess. And keep it homemade. Keep everything homemade. Try and keep away from bottled sauces, outside food. I think homemade is beautiful. It's full of warmth. It's full of love. That's what we need to give to our kids. That's what we need for ourselves. We really need that belonging, like back to the roots. We need that homemade, that home cooking. I'm a big pioneer.
I think here's to that. I think that's a great point to make. And I also think that India's kind of like on the cusp of ruining itself or becoming incredibly healthy. So if we look at the West, I mean, the amount of money spent on artificial enhancements and packaging, etc. The supermarket industry in India hasn't taken off yet, which is a great thing. And obviously, slowly but surely throughout India, plastic's getting banned. Waste is being looked upon as being something that's not particularly good for the environment. And I think really, if India starts really thinking about crops and really trying to do something a lot more seasonally. Now, as a chef, this is a bit of a problem for me, which I've always blamed the customers on. Customers are the ones that, to a certain extent, expect to have ingredients throughout the year, sadly. And if I go back to when I first started off as a chef, in the UK, late 80s, we didn't have a tomato on a menu if it wasn't in season. And that was fact, realistically. May, June, July, August, there was never a tomato on the menu. But as customers become more aware of what they wanted strawberries throughout the year, which is a bit of a no-no. And in the UK, we ended up having strawberries from Kenya for most of the year, a little bit from the UK, and then they'd probably be even coming from places like California and Australia. So where does all this end, really? Where should we be? What should be everybody's rhetoric as far as this is concerned?
I'm going to go back to your earlier question first, if that's okay, Shaun. I think, I write about this a lot. I write about cooking Indian food in a way that fits our modern existences. Because yes, we do, I totally agree with you, we do need to go back to what Indian food is all about, which is that it's very wholesome. There's home cooking and there's party cooking. I love those phrases. Also, I love pure veg. That's another one of my favorite phrases. But the reality is, unfortunately, is that we don't live lives like our grandparents did. The modern day realities are enormous and it's very, very tough. I live in London, in central London. I have a day job. I have a passion job. I have 2 children. I have no house help. And, you have to do it in a way that's realistic about what's achievable. And we're not at that phase yet where we're treating Indian food. I mean, the thali is the perfect example of a wholesome, balanced meal because everything is there in little portions. If you look at it, you've got all your macronutrients. I mean, this is more your zone than my zone, but I take an interest. It's a really balanced meal. The issue we have is time. We're very time poor. We lead busier and busier lifestyles. And the reality is that it does boil down to moderation, and we're just not moderate anymore as a society. We live in excess. I mean, my mom, who's sitting here, a massive inspiration, she always says, she always says that, everything, too much of anything is bad for you. So you start going excess on ghee, it's terrible for you. You start doing excess of anything. So I think we have to go back to some of those values, but make them relevant to who we are and how we live today. And then.
Thank you for that. I really agree with everything you're saying. In the town of Market Drayton, the culture on the whole, we don't have many restaurants, and the predominant ones are Indian, Chinese, and kebab takeaways. So we have a couple of nicer restaurants, but there's certainly no fine dining. As part of the festival, we decided, because we're sort of riding on the wave of a national campaign that takes place during the festival, which is called British Food Fortnight. And this is backed by DEFRA, which is the Department for Education, Food and Affairs in the UK. It's also supported by the Telegraph newspaper, the Co-op supermarket chain, and some top celebrity chefs. Funnily enough, they run a competition every year. So if you're running an event during their British Food Fortnight, enter. And we did enter it, and we won it. And that was quite a shock. But the reason we won it, and the reason I'm telling you, is because we got 60 groups together during our first year to mobilize them to start looking at what we're offering locally, what we're eating seasonally. And that's in a response to healthy eating, but also the environment. You were saying about strawberries coming throughout the year. We have beautiful seasonal fruit in the UK. We have beautiful seasonal meat. We have a lot of game that lots of birds are around, and nobody eats them, and they're there, and what a waste. So at the festival, we look and we work with chefs and how we can show different recipes, and including spices as well to make it more fun and attractive. And this year, we worked with a school, and we went in, and it's a school in quite a deprived area in the town. And there's been a real problem in the UK of people not knowing how to cook homemade food. They go to the takeaway, as I said, and there's a gap in the education, and the schools just aren't taking it seriously. So we went in with a celebrity chef, and we did some cookery classes. We showed the children what the seasonal fruits and food were during that time, and we gave them a recipe to take home. And then we invited their parents at the end, and we ate a community meal together. And that was a really, really marvelous thing to do. And as you said, it's very difficult because of time. People don't have time. But I think planting the seeds in the children's minds and trying to show them new ways to cook and where food comes from is really important.
I have another view as well on seasonality, which is that there's quite a lot written about seasonality now that shows that if we were all to do seasonality, we wouldn't actually be able to feed the population. because you can't actually grow enough seasonal fruit and veg to feed, the growing population. So it's also more expensive. So to create an environment where you can grow strawberries and tomatoes, using all the gaseous chambers and everything, it's more expensive to do that than to fly them down from Spain or Peru or wherever. So it's a really interesting concept, but again, quite hard to deliver on a mass scale for the general population and for busy people especially.
So I think there's so much to discuss in that topic of its own, really, and it would really go off the discussion that we're having. But I've spent a lot of time with fishermen over the years, and in a country like India, if you go to a market like Chennai, the fish market in Chennai, which if none of you have ever been, it's the most incredible place. But pretty much everything's fished out of the sea around the coast of India. In many Western countries, there's only 3 or 4 fish that have been overfished to death. And almost all those countries say that the seas are empty of fish, but they're only empty of 3 or 4 varieties of fish, realistically. There's still plenty of fish in the sea, but nobody wants to eat them. In the West, if people see a bone in a fish, they'd be suing a restaurant half the time, which is not necessarily a particularly good thing. But like I say, I think if I talk about that, we'll get way off the subject. Okay, so just talking about India generally. So obviously I've been here a long time. I've seen lots of change. I think when I first came, there were a few, let's say, master chefs in India, Indian master chefs that kind of like ran and ruled pretty much everything culinarily in India at one point in time. And in those days, it was all family dining. There was very little drinking happening at that time. As of today, there's becoming less and less family dining, I think, as is what's happening in other countries in the past. And more people are going out these days, grazing, eating a lot more fried foods, drinking a lot more. So where do you see Indian food within that context? And what's going to happen to that whole family environment, which obviously, depending on what community you come from, is an incredibly important part of life?
So I think it's important for our generation to pass down a certain tradition. It's like anything, it's like a language. We have to make sure we speak to the second generation, to the next generation, so the tradition stays alive. And it's with any tradition. So Indian food can only stay alive if we cook it at home, if that's what we give to the children. Unfortunately, now there are ads. Oh, mom, I'm feeling hungry. Pick up the phone, order on Zomato, or and that's what it's becoming. It's not like, oh, let me make something for you. What do you want to eat? So it's just that whole mindset is changing, and that is what is so sad about it. Yes. And I also feel it's very important to educate and teach the next generation how to cook. Because I don't know why we're not investing that time. It's a life skill. It's like how you need to know how to swim or you need to know how to drive. I think cooking is a life skill. You don't know where you're going to be and where. So I have 2 boys and I make sure they cook. We cook twice or thrice a week together. And I think it's very important. Boys or girl is something that you need to know. Brilliant. And I think and that's the only way.
Everybody should.
Thank you. But I really think if we could promote this as a generation so that it goes forward, our tradition will not die. It will stay alive only if we want it to stay alive.
I mean, food is part of everybody's culture, really. And it's something that has historically been passed down generations. The last, let's say, generation and a half, I think everything's gotten incredibly confused. But food is part of everybody's culture. Everybody was involved in a family meal at one point of time, I think. And it's sad to see that really, really slipping. When I'm at home in Calcutta, I'm very much in my kitchen. I like to cook. It's kind of like an obsession for me, and I enjoy cooking more and more. But I guess you can also carry on from that.
Thank you. So this is a really, really big thing for me because I was such a fussy eater as a child, and I was absolutely adamant that my children would be incredible eaters. And they are such incredible eaters that they will actually tell me British food is bland. So they love their food, they love cooking. My son, who is now 8, has been using a fish knife since he was 18 months old. He started going, I basically told him how to use it and watched him like a hawk, and he now chops like Jamie Oliver, something I still can't do. And my daughter's a fantastic baker. She prefers sweets than savories. But I'm speaking at a really interesting restaurant next week in Delhi, in Gurgaon, called Little Big, which is all about enjoying the dining experience with your children. And I talk about this a lot because I think there are really 2 or 3 things you can do. One is don't force feed your children because it creates really negative vibes and relationships with food. I think eat with your kids, just enjoy food. Don't sit there with a silver spoon. I'm like, how would you feel if someone was shoving a silver spoon in your face the whole time? And the third thing is, as exactly what you said, just cook with them, just enjoy food. It's about texture, it's about color. And I think if we did more of that, maybe we wouldn't be so hung up about skinny kids, which, by the way, I used to be one. I've fattened out, which is okay. But we have a real responsibility to help our next generation develop that positive relationship with food, and that's how you do it.
So before you get a chance, so in the UK today, there's so much, there's so many cookery shows on TV. Everybody's buying a new cookbook, like Jamie Oliver's new cookbook, blah blah. But realistically, I see less and less people cooking in the UK. They're obsessed by food. They're obsessed by everything to do with it, but nobody's cooking at home. I think a little bit more and more. But if you go through the supermarkets, you can actually pick up an Indian takeaway for 2 that you stick in the microwave. And there's fresh soups in the refrigerators. I mean, and there is this kind of like really big push towards fresh, which is a good thing. But I see less and less people cooking at home, which is a really, really sad thing also.
They do say the average number of recipes people in the UK use from a cookbook is 3 to 4. So there are lots of reasons why people buy cookbooks, and that's inspiration, it's coffee table, you're buying into a brand, So there's a lot of different reasons. But, the tide is changing, and people are, because the younger generations, as we all know, teenagers, millennials, are some of the healthiest people in the world. They're drinking less than I am, which is shocking and outrageous. But the reality is that there's a big swerve. The tide is changing in that there are university students now who are incredibly healthy. They don't drink alcohol, they're doing fitness, they're basically going out, and their socializing is the runs and the marathons and the Tough Mudders. And so I think, I remain hopeful always. And my books had fantastic reception from, I would say, I wasn't expecting it, but from quite a young audience as well, which is lovely to see.
I think the real challenge is to the bridge from exactly what you're saying about knowing how to cook, but also educating people about that. We have, on contrast to people being healthy, we have a really big child obesity problem in the UK. And I think this leads back to the lack of time. There's a lot of families who are not on big salaries. They can't afford fresh vegetables because they're expensive. So they buy convenience food, they buy tinned food, and it's just not healthy. And also they're buying cheap quality meat as well, which is horrendous, which comes from factory farms. I feel really passionately against that. And we actually have a local organic farm where we live, which is owned by 5,000 shareholders. It's an amazing, amazing project. And I'd love to see more things like that happening in the UK. But it's how we manage to get this education of eating healthily and cooking with lack of time. And I don't have an answer, and I'm not sure anyone has an answer. And maybe it's, as I said, going and working with the children in school and trying to work that way. But it's a tough challenge.
Yeah, I think in the UK it's probably a little bit easier because all the chefs in the UK are bought up by supermarkets to a certain extent. They're all involved and engaged with supermarkets somehow. And they all have responsibilities as chefs in the UK. I think that's something, and I've been saying to chefs in India for many, many years, and obviously maybe chefs to a certain extent are not really in that position to say or decide what they want to do so much here, but things are changing. Okay, so as I mentioned before, I was just in the UK just during Christmas and New Year. And if you look at the high street, if you look at the supermarkets, you'd think that almost all the country has become vegetarian or vegan suddenly. There's like hoardings and billboards. I mean, it's become like a national obsession suddenly. I don't know where it's come from. Well, I think there's been a steady kind of like infiltration of it. And obviously, I think people are starting to realize that red meats are not necessarily as particularly good for us. On the other side of the coin, I live in India. I do all my work here. India's becoming less vegetarian, more non-vegetarian every day. Yeah, people in the West are drinking a lot less. India's never drank so much. So where does all this end? And I know it's a developing nation thing, but it's incredible to say 10 years ago in a city like Calcutta, the Bengalis were always out drinking and eating and consuming vast quantities of everything, smoking, doing any and everything. But every community's pretty much got on the bandwagon, and certain communities, particularly the Marwari community, the youngsters in the Marwari community, are drinking and eating non-veg heavier than anybody else in the country today, I think. So you can take that forward. So a vegetarian that became a non-vegetarian that's now become a vegetarian again.
Yeah, I've had quite a journey, and I'm a Marwari myself. So I think it's.
I wasn't pointing fingers.
I think it's all about emulating the West. I don't know why India has this obsession about white skin and emulating the West. So whatever the West does, it comes to India a few years later, and to Calcutta even 10 years later from the rest of the country. And it's just, it's a trend. I think they're going to get over it. Like everything else, it just becomes a trend. Now running marathons has become such a fad. This season there has been like 20 runs organized. I remember when I started running, there was only one. And it's fabulous to see people really out there, really looking out for their health. So I think it's all about trends and fads, and I think they're going to get over this as well. It's just, it's a hump. And this whole healthy food and all is coming into the West and now slowly coming into India as well, and Calcutta is going to catch up. And I think very soon we'll
It wasn't a
see
Calcutta-directed question. I mean, I was just talking about Indian metros in general. I think.
Yes. No, no, but there are different demographics, right? Like Calcutta is a little different from the rest of the country. So I think it's just a fad. I think they're going to get over it the moment they see the benefits, the health benefits of avoiding that lifestyle.
Fingers crossed. So I was speaking to a chef friend of mine in the UK, and he was saying that in offices today they can breathalyze you. In kind of like corporate offices in London, they'll do breathalyzer tests apparently, and if you're over the limit, then they'll send you home from work.
Makes sense.
Which is a great thing, I think.
Makes sense.
I think that's incredible. And office lunches in the UK were always, or in the West, were always kind of like a place where people did lunch, realistically. But I think you can continue on with my last question there.
So in recent years, there's been a real trend in extremes when it comes to eating and drinking. I think, and we have to snap out of that, I think, because, you know, with the vegan trend in the West, a lot of people are developing iron deficiencies because meat may be fatty, but it's also very high in iron. You know, it's actually, there are benefits to it. Cutting fish out of your diet, a lot of oily fish is an excellent source of omega-3. And omega-3 is great for brain, you know, to keep your brain plodding along. And I think, you know, we have to some extent, just step back a bit. I write a lot about the turmeric trend, which I think is now, the West is over with it. But, you know, a few years ago, the West discovered turmeric. And I did a lot of BBC interviews about turmeric, the magical new ingredient. And I was like, guys, hello, India, you know. And like turmeric milk. I mean, turmeric milk is the most disgusting thing on the planet. Like turmeric latte is what your parents offered you, so you miraculously recovered. Okay, and the British are spending, and even in America, they're spending £4 for a tiny cup, like 400 rupees for a tiny cup of turmeric latte. I mean, you know, coconut oil is like the new superfood. And then they trash it. Coconut oil gets trashed by Americans, and the research is funded by the vegetable oil lobby. I'm like, you want to come to India and fight with my grandmother? Come on over. So I think, you know, the point is, there is no such thing as a superfood. Every food is super. And we should be grateful to have it in our lives. And, we need to stop. Like, it shouldn't be about not drinking or not eating meat. So it should be about enjoying everything in a balanced and moderate way. And then you can live to a good solid age and look fabulous and be good. And my friend Devika's here in the audience, who has been named and shamed throughout my new book. And she's practically a yogi. And we enjoy many drinks together and many recipes as well. It makes you very flexible. There you go. So I think, the Brits, they are, I'm sorry to say, they're way behind even Calcutta when it comes to their approach to food and drink. So they have a lot of catching up to do too.
I think if you are a vegan chef, if there's any of you in the audience, we're crying out for you. Apparently, restaurants just can't find vegan chefs, and everyone wants vegan food, and it's a real problem, bizarrely. So yeah, I think it is an interesting sort of fashion at the moment. I think it's definitely a younger generation, but also it is definitely on some level linked to environmentalism. I mean, I'm all for choice, and I think choice is really important, moderation, and a little bit of everything. But there's also some really important questions to ask about the environment, what we're doing to the environment, the trees we're cutting down to farm. We seem to be destroying the planet, and I think food does play its part in that, and it's a really big subject. I'm not an environmentalist, but I do see what's going on, and there are serious problems in how we're a growing population. The world is growing. How can we feed ourselves? How can we do it ethically? How can we do it better? And particularly without harming and putting animals in these mass-produced sort of houses. I just think that's just appalling. It's really growing frequently now in the UK. We're having mass-produced chicken farms and pigs, and I don't want to eat that kind of meat. I'd rather go without, personally. And I'm glad I have the choice, because I do, where I live, I have the choice. I have to pay more for the meat, but I do have a choice, and I'm pleased with that. But a lot of people don't have that choice. Maybe I'm lucky in that way. I don't know.
Yeah, so India's obviously is changing, and I can't tell you the amount of changes that there have been in India in the amount of time that I've been here. When governments have started to look at things like plastics, some states have banned plastic, which is a great thing, I think. We've got states like Sikkim, which have become an organic state as of today, really. So India's much more advanced in many ways than any Western country in pockets. There's enormous wind farms in the south of India, which you'd never know about unless you saw them from a plane, realistically. Nobody's really talking about what's going on as far as all those things are concerned. But I think we're probably running out of time. I think we've probably only got about 15 minutes left. But I think something that's always interested me, and obviously we're talking about the world and Indian food. So this whole idea of, let's say, bastardized Punjabi cuisine is really what is all that's really available internationally, historically. But obviously we've got, I mean, India has so many cuisines, and obviously you can take it to extremes of something like Nagamese cuisine, or something a bit more simpler to understand, like Kerala, Kashmiri. But how do we put all these cuisines, or how do we get them out there internationally, I think? Even Bengali food, obviously. I have a Bengali mother-in-law myself. I'm a good Bengali boy these days, good Bengali jamai. I eat fish well with my hands, so my mother-in-law is very happy. But how do we get Indian cuisine out of India, realistically? Which, I mean, I think that's the biggest challenge for India, because it really hasn't happened yet.
Well, just very quickly, I think in the UK, if you actually asked a lot of people what was in a curry, the average person probably wouldn't know. They'd probably be very confused about the spices as well. Yeah, and the spices in the supermarket are so cheap, but if you think back, hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands and thousands of people have died in the name of spice. And now we just pull it off the shelf, we don't really think about it. A lot of people don't. They don't even know what it is. Yet their ancestors sort of sailed overseas and didn't even get anywhere, or died in ships. So I think it's education, really, I would say.
this is totally self-serving, but you should write excellent cookbooks, I think, is the key to changing the problem. No, but really, I think it's not just the recipes, it's also presenting, a face and a personality and a voice that is devoid of food snobbery, that people can relate to, that it doesn't feel quite so detached from the reality of what people are doing every day. And, we will get there. I think it's wonderful. And, I'm learning something new every day. So imagine.
So you should get somebody to open a good Bengali restaurant in London somewhere. Really, something really exciting.
I'm not going to open a restaurant because it'll kill the joy
No,
of
you don't have to
cooking,
do it
but anyway.
yourself, but you can get somebody else to do it for you.
But yes, I think, it's got to be about talking about our food and our cuisine in a really, really positive, contemporary and, educated way. So people realize that, there is no such thing as a curry, and the food we have and we eat, is amazing. And this is a nation that gave us Maharajas, Breakfast of Champions and Miss Universe several times over. We've got to be doing something right.
I still think there's something very much of a curry in this world, and it's like such a huge phenomenon. So where's your husband from, you say?
Half Peruvian.
Oh, Peruvians don't have curries, but the rest of the world, they don't really as such. Not of their own.
No, my take on this is, why do we need to spread it? Why does it need to go? It's our tradition. Why don't people come to India, experience it over here? Because I think we completely corrupt it when we take it outside. Either you serve it the way it's supposed to be served, or better you come to India and experience it. The whole world is becoming global, so you're not getting the unique experience of that country when you go to Japan because you've eaten it somewhere else. So that whole charm and the uniqueness of the flavors of having a meal with your hands in a proper brass plate or in a banana leaf, that experience is not there because you're having it out of a ceramic plate. And
No, I also think that's part of the education process. For me,
but it's not practical as well, Shaun. So I'm
No,
sorry
no,
to cut you,
no,
but it's not
I
practical to
understand.
have that experience internationally. But
I think you
not
can.
everything.
I think
Banana
you can.
leaves.
But also they don't, Westerners don't have access to homes.
Yeah.
So they're eating restaurant food and then they're thinking this is it.
Exactly.
Greasy, deep fried,
No, but so I've always thought in somewhere like New York, if you did a Wazwan restaurant with huge kind of like platters of 36 meat dishes on the floor, you'd be sold out for months, really, and everybody would be digging in. And I think there's something exciting about that, really. And I think eating with your hands is something that's a beautiful thing to do. I couldn't imagine not eating with my hands these days. But anyway, I'm starting to get a nudge from my right-hand side.
Sorry, so I wanted to
Yeah,
just take
please.
on that. And the other way is when we go abroad or when we live internationally, cook for people who come home. Cook. Don't cook international food. Cook what you have eaten. I think that's the only way to spread your country's food, like your home cooking and your tradition.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I agree. Okay, so I think we should open up to a few questions. I don't know how much time we have. My time was saying that we have about 10 minutes left, I think. 7 minutes left, but we can probably push it a little bit further. So, anybody has any questions? Yes, please. I think you can shout. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I think it's brilliant. So I've actually been in the UK and made shukto in the past, actually.
Yeah, sure. So I often take, when I go to my radio interviews and things, I often take things that they've never eaten. So I'll take things like, dal vadas and dhokla, and I'll tell them about fermented food and then they talk about it on the radio, and it's like Indian food is not just about curries. That's not all we have. And I think it's such an important responsibility because you have to break those barriers and all those misperceptions about what our food actually is.
So get it out there. Any other questions? Yes, please. You can you holler from the back? I'm sure you can. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, for sure. Me? I don't think I've ever heard that really. So I grew up in Manchester.
Actually, I know the curry guy really well. His name is Dan Toombs. Yes, Dan Toombs. He's a lovely man, a Texan. I mean, I'm not sure I understand what the question is, but I think, we just have to explain to them and keep saying it, and I'm going to do it until I go hoarse, that curry is just not Indian food. It's delicious, and it's, the perfect hangover food, but it's not Indian. And, until we get, people to understand that, I think there's always going to be this misperception, but that's not how we eat.
Yeah,
You
so
can't eat that every day.
Yeah, so maybe I have to apologize. I grew up in Manchester, and we used to love going out on the, I can say out on the piss, can't I, every Friday, Saturday night, and go out for a curry afterwards. I mean, it was just what we did, really.
It's a national pastime, or it was, not so much anymore.
I think so. Yeah, so I've become much more evolved since I've been here. Any other questions? Yes. Yes, please. Drinks to, I think it depends what country you come from. Yeah, so I think if you look at particularly European culture, drinking and food went on simultaneously historically. I mean, you ate slowly and you drank, and it was a very social thing. I think. Any Punjabis in the audience? I think I class myself as a Punjabi for a long time, actually. And I used to say that I become a Punjabi. These days I drink, and have food. I don't want to quell that high once it gets started. No, but I also agree. So if we look at Ayurveda, you'd have something as a bit of a stimulant, just to get your juices flowing, if you like, before you ate something historically, which would be fruit-based or vegetable-based. So it really depends on what country you come from. I think if you look at the French diet, and the French are some of the healthiest people in the world, actually, and they consume tons of animal fats, they consume copious amounts of red wine, but they don't eat large portions, they don't overeat, and they eat incredibly well. They don't eat cheap food, they actually eat well, they eat small portions, and they enjoy life. So it's difficult to explain for there to be an answer to that. Yes, please. Come out, we can't hear you.
It's not a question. I just wanted to say that we mustn't. I think we didn't mention Anglo-Indian food, like fusion food, which brings up great flavors.
Yeah. So maybe I might do an Anglo-Indian restaurant in the UK this year. I might do a modern Anglo-Indian restaurant.
I remember my mum, who spent a lot of years in England, and then before we moved here, and she would make roast chicken with bits of Indian spices.
Yeah.
She would make like tork dal with cooking apples, and they just
So I can't really disclose too much more about that, but I do believe that the British would love things. Let's say, and I'm talking more about using spices here, but something like a really slow cooked shoulder of pork, Goan style. With some really good rotis and naans, maybe stuffed with blue cheese. Who knows, really? I mean, they'd like all those flavors. Or like a really nice Anglo-Indian style roast beef or something. Bombay roast chicken. So yeah, I mean, so let's see what happens this year.
I think it's really interesting that you brought up Anglo-Indian food, but there's something about, there is no such thing as Indian food. It's about the food of India. You know, we don't have a cuisine, we have cuisines. And you can go from, you know, state to state, region to region, home to home, and the same dish can be cooked differently. And there's, you know, we need to be incredibly proud of that. You know, there is, I don't think any other nation with such a diverse range of food on offer, and drink as well. I mean, you know, even drinking yogurt, South India, you go to Kerala, they do sambaram. You know, lassi, you've got this incredible variety just in the yogurt that's served with the meal. So, you know, I think that's probably a subject for a whole different panel discussion, but one that, you know, there's so much to explore there.
So somebody many years ago said to me, what would you class as an Indian dal? And I said, if you go around India and give a million people a handful of dals and say, make me a traditional dal, you'll have a million different dals, actually. So that's really what India's all about, I think. My timer went off, but can we have a couple more questions? Are we allowed?
My favorite is dal soup. I still don't know what that means.
So I think, again, going back to Anglo-Indians, the old Mallika tawny soup, which is really dal soup, really, just to keep the... Yeah. Yes, please. So I don't know about that movement, actually.
It's a bit like HelloFresh and Gusto, isn't it? Yeah, that we have in Britain. I mean, did you know? It's a really interesting concept. For those of you who didn't hear the question or don't know what this is, basically, you sign up to a service and they deliver a box with all the ingredients that you need to cook a meal. And there's a recipe card in the box. They have it here too. So we have it in Britain as well. It's brilliant because it gets the family a fresh meal. You get to try something a little bit different that maybe you wouldn't normally cook, and the whole family can get stuck in. So I'm a big fan of it, and I did some of my recipes with a delivery box. I did like, you know, bhara bengan and like things that maybe the Western audiences wouldn't normally do. The only thing is it's quite expensive. It's actually quite an upper class thing because it costs more, convenience costs money. Right? So it costs more to get your food delivered like that, and you're not really learning anything. You're not absorbing those things because the chances of you then going off and buying sumac and, you know, pink Himalayan salt and all these really like interesting different ingredients is quite difficult. But I think it's a wonderful trend, and maybe it'll get so popular that it'll get cheaper and more people can access it. And frankly, if it then leads on to more home cooking, then why not? I would say that I did sign up briefly to a subscription service to try it out, and they then came back and they were doing a really hard sell, and I was like, listen, the food in my house is better than the stuff you send in a box, okay? So don't take me off your subscription.
There is a company like this called Spicebox actually now, and they send you, you can subscribe to a monthly Spicebox where you can learn all about what's in it. I quite like it, but again, it's terribly expensive, and it's a luxury. You'd probably give it as a gift to somebody, I would think.
So yeah, in India, actually, they do have it. I know in Bombay they have. It's not so much Indian food, but they have a lot of international food, quesadillas and laksa and things like that. It is also to spread the awareness of non-Indian food, that sometimes people don't make non-Indian food. Like they have cooks who make Indian food, but they want to have a variety. So that's a great way of getting variety into the house. But I feel we are so blessed in this country with the staff that we have, with the helpers. It's almost like a flavor box. You just tell them that keep things ready, and you just have to go and toss things. So, you know, and plus ingredients are a lot more fresh. Sometimes what we get in a flavor box or in a box of ingredients are not as fresh. They've been kept for longer. And like she said, that you don't go and learn. You just, you know, everything is just there. And I think sometimes the whole process of going and buying ingredients and seeing 10 other things, sometimes going to the vegetable vendor and actually seeing what's fresh and making what's there instead of having something that's already in the mind. So I think the whole process is so much more enjoyable, but definitely convenience is always better than no cooking at all.
Yeah, so I actually live in Lake Gardens, right next to the supermarket, and my market's literally 100 meters from my house, probably less, actually. And I go to my local market all the time when I'm here. I cook whatever's local. A lot of the time, there's didis that have come in from the districts, and they've got 10 duck eggs in front of them, a couple of a dozen hen eggs, they've got 2 dozen bananas, and they're just selling really whatever they brought, whatever they've... and for me, I think that's something that's very much available in India today. You don't have to go to a supermarket yet. There's still local markets, and I think whatever we've all talked about today, and I think it's what's on the world's conscious today, is to buy locally, to try and sustain those farmers. And I think it's the same in fashion in India. Obviously, my wife's into fashion and design, but it's about sustaining those weavers as well in that industry. What would India be if suddenly the supermarkets did take over? There'd be literally millions and millions of people that couldn't be in a situation to earn money, realistically. So buy locally, eat locally, fuse those ingredients into international recipes. It doesn't really matter, really. A vegetable you can put into any recipe or any dish, or a pulse and a dal, etc. But I think that's by far the most important thing that anybody should be doing today, and I think it's probably the most important message of this panel discussion, I think. So, are we done? Yes, please.
Before you all go, thank you so much for listening to us all. It's been really great. Thanks, guys. I thought it would be rude to come all the way from the UK with an example gingerbread box and not share it. So I brought some samples. Now, it probably isn't enough for one each, but they're on a tray there, and they can be broken in 2, so they're packs of 2 fingers. Please do try it. You can't buy it in India, but it is delicious. And if you want any more, you're going to have to come over to Market Drayton and buy some.
And it's quite interesting, yeah? So something like gingerbread has probably been around the UK since the early 18th century, I would imagine. I mean, it's something that's been around for a long, long time.
Gingerbread, I mean, it's not British. It's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, the Greeks, the Romans, but this is our version. I bet this is the oldest gingerbread brand in the country, and it's more like a ginger biscuit, so it's like eating a little piece of history, really.
Yes, so just for your sake, Christmas has just come and gone. I think Calcutta's probably a much more Christmassy city than any city in the UK. It's quite incredible, huh?
Then
I mean,
you should sell it here. Yeah.
Possibly.
Anyone distribute gingerbread?
But
Fantastic.
you'd be amazed at how many people have to have a Christmas cake at Christmas in Calcutta, or have to have a plum pudding, or I mean, it's kind of like a Calcutta obsession. I'll show you some photographs of Park Street on Christmas Eve. Okay, thank you very much for having us. Thank you.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of the session. I don't know about you, but I was salivating the entire time the session was on, because the entire panelists did an amazing job in making us enlightened about all the different cuisines and the different exotic dishes which are out there. Miss Mallika Basu would be available to sign her books. Miss Masala and Masala, which I'm sure... Definitely, yes. Please go ahead. And if you want more of Mallika Basu, then of course you can, have a personal private chat.